The Minister of Environment and Fisheries, Barbara Creecy, has confirmed today that promising developments are underway to harness green hydrogen energy. She was speaking at the COP28 Climate Change Summit taking place in Dubai at the moment.
Furthermore, in November, our Cabinet approved the implementation plan for the country's just energy transition. This plan focuses on critical areas for investment, including electricity infrastructure, new energy vehicles, green hydrogen, skills, municipal distribution systems, and interventions directed together with communities who are most affected by the energy transition. There are also promising developments underway in our country to harness the potential of green hydrogen and to beneficiate critical minerals and rare earths to support the development and drive for a green transition. This year, we have also extended an invitation, as you have heard, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kaskama Umliba community group, who have created this wonderful tapestry that shows the impacts on their lives of climate change, and on this side their vision for a climate resilient community.
So that's the Minister Barbara Creecy at the opening of the South African Pavilion at COP28 today. So let's speak now to Tshepo Ntsane, who is part of Rand Merchant Bank's Finance and ESG, that's Environment, Social and Governance Advisory. He has an honours in chemical engineering. He's had a great deal of experience in the petrochemical industry, researching sustainable technical solutions. Good evening and thank you so much for joining us. We spoke last week as it was getting underway. You spoke a lot about the African lobby. Of course, they met in Nairobi before this event to come to a common position. Do you get a sense they're making headway? Because we're really in the thick of these technical discussions where the devil really is in the detail.
Thanks, Sally. I think, we're seeing very positive feedback from the African continent. We just saw now the president of Kenya, who's actually mostly leading these conversations, particularly from the Nairobi declaration, which was from the Kenya Climate Summit. What they've put forward is the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative, which is actually a build-up from the Climate Summit, because if you remember then, there was the Africa Green Initiative or Green Business Initiatives, whereby they're looking at green industries, green businesses, and there was a pledge of about $4.5 billion coming out of that. So what then Africa did is they took that and then used that to negotiate at COP, and it's actually been playing out quite well, because they're putting together their solutions, they're putting together ideas, but originating from the Climate Summit.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that our senior reporter Sipa Mandla-Goge was flagging, and he's been to a number of these summits, is that it comes down to the wire. They often extend the summit, and at the end of the day, they don't necessarily get to the right wording in the agreement to get everyone on board, but it seems certain projects can progress anyway. Is that what's going to happen with this green industrialization process?
Yes, so you may find, especially out of COP, certain languages create a lot of discussions. I mean, the biggest one now being around either fossil fuels are phased down or phased out. But outside of that, you can see that there's other technologies that can go forward. Your green hydrogens, your renewable energy, your clean cook stoves, and all of those don't need that type of language to be finalized, and there can be funding that can be directed towards those type of projects while these other things are being negotiated.
Is it all about money at the end of the day?
I think it's about money and technical support, because what you find is that sometimes you can give a country money, but they don't know how to deploy that type of money. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the resources to do so. So it's about, yes, providing the financial support, but also the technical support together with the skills, because sometimes you may need to bring in some of the advanced skills into the continent or to a specific country to help them deploy and invest this capital.
At the beginning of the summit, there was a big announcement saying that the Loss and Damage Fund, which of course is there to assist countries who are really feeling the brunt of climate change in their weather patterns, that it was now operational. We saw a whole lot of pledges coming in. What's happened in the interim? And what will that fund be used for come the end of the summit?
Yeah, so if you remember the last time we spoke, the pledges were sitting at around 400 million, over 400 million.
That's US dollars, yeah?
That's US dollars, and then now they're now above 700 million. So really the initial part of the funding is just to get that fund going. So I don't think that money alone is enough to deploy the type of mitigation actions required. But I think it's just to get the system going, to get resources into it. Obviously, there needs to be more pledges coming through. But when you look at COP in general, if you look at the total pledges that have been made thus far, it's anything above 80 billion US dollars. So which is actually quite good, because in 6 days, those amount of pledges have been made. But again, there's still an argument of what do they look like? Is it debt? Is it concessionary funding? Is it equity? Is it grants? So that mechanism is still being negotiated, but at least there's a good indication that pledges are coming through. It's now a matter of how do you operationalize them and how do you ensure that the money starts getting deployed.
Tell me about the Paris Agreement, because that's obviously part of this as well. What exactly is it, and who has opted in and who's opted out of this?
Yeah, so the Paris Agreement was agreed upon at COP28 in Paris. And this is where, I think for the first time, all parties, at the moment, the signatories are about 196. And that's quite a lot of countries and governments and regions that have agreed. So the idea there is they've all partnered to say, let us put plans in place to avoid a global temperature increase above 1.5 degrees. Right? So let's all work together to ensure that if temperature is to increase, let it stop at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what has happened is that every year at COP, that target is being reviewed, especially this year. It's the first time that we are doing a global stock take. As to say, all these NDCs, how have countries progressed? And is there a need to revise, which the science is saying there might be a need to revise some of these targets because we are actually not on the right trajectory, and we now have to revise some of these NDCs, because from a signatory, you have to put on a target. It's called a nationally determined contribution on NDC. As a country, you say, these are my emissions, and this is how much I'll reduce by a specific date. You are then measured according to that. And this year is going to be the first time all those submissions are going to be looked at and to say, how have you progressed, and which countries have performed well and which ones haven't.
So talk to me about the big polluters, China, Russia, the United States. Are they making significant changes in the way they create energy? Are they still massive polluters? So,
and this is where the debate comes from. You still look at a lot of these high polluters still have fossil fuels in their economies. However, though, if you look at what they're doing in terms of the green economy, I mean, China deploys renewable energy at a scale that's unheard of. So yes, they're still sitting in these fossil fuels, but what they're doing in terms of renewable energy, China, India, the US as well, you've seen they're deploying a lot of these low-hanging fruit type technologies to ensure that as they try and figure out what to do around fossil fuels, these clean energy technologies are being deployed at scale.
And very quickly, what do you realistically think will come out of COP28?
I think out of COP28, first thing is this global stock take. We need to know as a globe, the world, is to say, how far have we progressed? What do we need to do going forward? And obviously there will still be tension around funding, but I think it's going to be important for these pledges to become a reality.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You always bring such clarity to these climate issues. Tshepo Ntsane, who is part of RMB's Finance and ESG Advisory. Now let's stay with international news. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has apologised for what he calls the pain, loss and suffering caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. He's been giving evidence at a public inquiry into his government's handling of the global health crisis. While he was facing the music inside, he had to deal with relatives of those who died during the pandemic, many blaming him for lockdown breaching parties held